Welcome to the virtual cafe for the Advertising Capstone Challenge. This is our third week of the virtual cafe for the challenge, and it's open and available to students at Swinburne University of Technology, Western Sydney University and the University of Queensland. So welcome students, and I'm sure you will pop in and out, which is the usual route that you take as students. We're very lucky this week to have Dr. Ross Honeywill from the Centre for Social Economics, and he is based in Melbourne, although he is also an adjunct associate professor at the University of Tasmania in their School of Business, and which is wonderful. So I approached Ross because he's done some very interesting research and developed a really interesting model around, well, consumer behavior essentially, but also around segmentation. And segmentation is something that we certainly look at a lot in advertising study, or certainly we do at Swinburne, and I'm sure you do at Western Sydney and University of Queensland. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ross, and he will speak for the next 30 to 40 minutes. And then at the end of that, we'll open the room for a little bit of Q&A. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks, David. So what I'm going to do today is just run through a look at particularly at how we think about segmentation, and we think about its limitations and what alternatives might be, and particularly from a very strongly an advertising point of view. There is a new economic order, and I'll explain that as we go through. And the abbreviation for that, of course, is NEO, New Economic Order, or NEO. And it really is changing the rules of advertising engagement in the 21st century. So what this presentation does is introduce you to the 4.7 million NEOs in Australia. And we'll take a look at the Suzuki brief, the Suzuki challenge, if you like, to kind of give it some context and bring it to life. But first, we really need to take a large view. And the large view is when we think about what's happening with the COVID recession, we're going to find that it's definitely a two-speed recovery. Parts of Australia and parts of the world are already in recovery. It's very faltering. There's a slow lane and there's a fast lane. Now, in fact, the fast lane is still going pretty well, and it's going pretty fast. So we'll look at how that works. So in the fast lane, we've got premiumization, and in the slow lane, commoditization. So we've got in the premiumization area, which is the fast lane, that's where value prevails as opposed to commoditized, where price prevails. In the premium space, we've got one-to-one marketing, and in the slow lane, we've got mass marketing. We've got distinctiveness as opposed to differentiation. And if any of you are doing any work on brand, you will probably know that there's a raging debate about how important differentiation has been the standard for the past 30 years, but distinctiveness, standing out, is becoming significantly more important than differentiation. And in the slow lane on the right-hand side, we've got sameness. We've got high margin in the fast lane, and we've got discounts in the slow lane. We've got relationships in the fast lane and features in the slow lane, and below the line, very strong emphasis on below the line versus the kind of standard above the line. So in the fast lane, there are the neo consumers, and in the slow lane, there are what we call traditional business as usual consumers, and that will become clear as we move through this. So just pausing on commoditization, because it's really, really important for students in particular to understand, advertising and marketing students to understand how dangerous commoditization is. And it occurs when someone sees a product as substitutable, and that substitutability has two dominant characteristics. One is design or technology parity, things that look the same or behave the same, perform the same, and price and product feature transparency. So increasingly the internet has made things transparent. So when someone's walking into a car dealership, for example, they probably know as much about the product and features as the person selling them the car. That kind of transparency has been an outcome of commoditization and online. When a price-sensitive customer can more easily compare products and services, they're really more likely to switch. So they'll go for the lowest price and become what I like to call promiscuous consumers. And what happens is you lose whatever competitive advantage you thought you had as a consequence of that. So this is not a place to be. And telcos like Telstra and Optus, fashion brands like Uniqlo and H&M really are in this commodity space. And when you're in the commodity space, price really is the core element of any value proposition. And when you have price as the core element of any value proposition, all you've got to trade on is price. So you better not have the second best price in a commoditized world. And the slow lane and its commoditization gives the impression that the entire economy is in free fall with slow growth and decreased margins, increased competition, static market share, falling earnings. And there's a psychological phenomenon that happens in this where the kind of dominant impression is, we tend to think that everything is like that. And because just about half the population is in what I call the traditional consumers that I mentioned earlier, and I'll explain in a minute. That kind of gives the impression that everyone is like that everyone's price sensitive, that everyone wants a commoditized world, that everyone wants the best price, the best bargain, the best discount, the best deal, and it simply is not so. And commoditization is particularly dangerous because it killed a travel legend. Thomas Cook was an iconic travel brand that had been around for almost 180 years. It employed 21,000 people across 16 countries. And in September 2019, it totally collapsed. It went out of business. Now, it was selling the same flights and hotel packages as its major competitors, but customers wanted to build their own packages, particularly these neo-consumers, and have much more flexibility in booking with different airlines and different hotels. So at Thomas Cook, you would have to run multiple searches to get that kind of flexibility, and people just weren't, no. At least a quarter of the population, the powerful neo-consumers, weren't prepared to do that. And as a journalist from Skift said, a commoditized product left Thomas Cook unable to deal with changes in consumer behavior and economic shocks. And the antidote to commoditization is premiumization, and it really starts with the premium consumer. I'm doing a premiumization project with one of the two major supermarket brands in Australia, and I was talking to the leadership team about the things they were doing, and they're doing some pretty interesting things before I came on the scene. And I said, so how have you kind of based this? How are you making these decisions? And they were really kind of making it up as they went, from their experience, and they have vast experience. Instead of starting with the consumer, and I said, well, who is this? Who are you doing all this for? And there was this stunned silence in the room. They were kind of doing it for, well, we don't know. And of course, you do need to know. You absolutely need to know. The first thing you need to know is who you're in business for. And, you have to decide whether you're in business for the premium consumer or whether you're in business for the traditional consumer. So the IBM Institute for Business Value said, by targeting narrower customer segments, brands will find that over time, their products and services will stand out from their competitors, and the customers they attract will be more willing to pay a premium for the differentiated experience. So they're really talking about narrowing the customer segments. I hope I never again hear someone say, a CEO say, well, we're in business for all Australians. Nobody is in business for everyone. Google isn't, Amazon isn't, Apple isn't. Nobody is in business for everyone. But when we think about segmentation, it's a common thing, but it's frequently suboptimal. And particularly when it's done at an enterprise level, or a particular brand does their segmentation with their own customer database. Its limitations are that it's typically transactional or behavioral, so it's kind of what their customers are doing, or they're looking at it from a point of view of life events, or they're looking at it from a demographic point of view. And all of that's pretty clunky. It's rarely attitudinal, and I'll explain shortly why that's so important. And it's very, very difficult to operationalize. And that means you can get an agency in to do a segmentation for your brand, and you can have a really, really smart segmentation, but how do you buy for them? How do you kind of find them through, and how does an agency go and buy the media for them? How do they know where they are? And they're not visible in competitors' results. So you can't look at your segments against a competitor, because by definition, they're your segments. So these are some of the really, really big restrictions and constraints that happen with an enterprise-based segmentation. So we got our data scientists and people like me, and we developed an algorithm of 194 mathematically weighted factors to bring to life the different value mindsets. So instead of looking at demographic factors or behavioral factors or transactional factors, we were really interested in the mindsets and the way people thought. And it has to be in any population or database. So in short, a universal consumer classification, or typology as I call it, different consumer types, that runs across any segmentation in any brand, and then make sure it's operationalized. So it doesn't mean that you throw out your segments, it just means you have a new way of looking at them. So the algorithm revealed that there are two fundamentally different mindsets, neos and traditionals. And on the left-hand side, we can see the neos. So there are 4.7 million neos in Australia, and there are 10 million traditionals in Australia. And the 10 million traditionals in Australia are really what I was talking about earlier. They're the kind of business as usual. This is the Harvey Norman value proposition, that it's all about a deal, it's all about urgency, it's all about being able to get it now, and the cheapest price, maybe some status thrown in. This is classic traditional behaviour. And 10 million, half of the Australian consuming population, because there are about 20 million 14 plus, are in that. Whereas there are only 4.7 million, they're about 24% of the population. And there's another group in between called what I call the aspiring neos. There are 5.3 million of those, and they're kind of like neos. They have a lot of the neo characteristics, and I'll talk about that too in a minute. But they probably don't have the capacity, they don't have the spending capacity. So it might be a teacher, for example, with a lot of neo attitudes and values, but they don't earn enough to be able to spend enough. And the algorithm is mercilessly commercial. If you're not spending enough, you get tipped out. But if you've got a lot of the neo attitudes, you don't become a traditional. Or it might be a professional woman out of the workforce for a couple of years to have kids. She no longer has the spending capacity, income, therefore she can't have the spending behaviour. And once again, the algorithm will tip her out, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden she starts to drink instant coffee. So there's the two completely different types, two completely different mindsets. And it's important to tell you that there's no migration between the two. You're pretty much born one and you die one. You don't kind of dip in and out of it. Some of you you'll all be trying to work out which one of mine, which, that'll become easier as we go on. So Neos are the most valuable consumers, but it's why they're the most valuable that's the breakthrough. It's the crucial bit. So we needed propensity modelling, so spending propensity. So there are 12 money factors in the algorithm, spend factors. There's predictive modelling. I'll skip to discriminant. I've spent 20 years working in discriminant modelling, and that simply needs behavioural factors. So you're looking for factors that rank highly, but more importantly, the factors that discriminate the most. What makes people different, not what makes them the same. And you also need predictive modelling. You have to be able to predict how people will behave. So there are a lot of companies around, increasing number of companies around, who are using big data and they're using past behaviour to predict future behaviour. And possibly the worst predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. It's certainly not a good predictor of future behaviour. So I might have bought a car last week, but I won't be buying a car for the next 4 years. I might have booked a holiday last week, but I won't be necessarily, I booked a hotel, in normal times, but it doesn't mean I'm going to do it again. Yes, there are some things we do habitually, but that's more habitual behavior rather than predictive behavior. So behavioral factors are not good predictors. We really need, attitudinal factors are much more important, because it's how we think and feel that will determine. So I'm not interested in what someone did last week. I'm interested in what they desire to do, what they would love to do next. That's where the predictive modelling comes in. So it's much more than a segmentation. The algorithm identifies this neo mindset that I've talked about, so it reveals their psychology. So this is about consumer psychology, their way of thinking, what they believe, what they love, and what they hate. Then identifies all Australians with that mindset, or anyone on a customer database with that mindset. They're socially progressive, they're very curious, they earn more, they're more active with their money, and crucially, they spend more. Just earning more, how much someone earns, any demographic, in fact, is a poor predictor of consumer behaviour. How much someone earns is a very poor predictor of consumer behaviour, because half the population, a lot of those traditionals I talked about are quite wealthy. It's just they hate spending money. So the fact that they have a lot of money, or they have very high salaries, is completely irrelevant, because they just don't like spending. And all this is embedded in the Roy Morgan single source consumer database, which is arguably the best of its kind in the world. And then I won't spend time on this because it gets too complicated, but for another level of nuance, one of our clients, for example, is the global luxury travel company Abercrombie & Kent, who are having a very bad time right now. And they're only targeting the hyper neos on the left. There's 478,000 of those. So that's the top 10% of neos. And they're all really in the luxury market. Then there's super neos. There are 2.5 million of those. We're working with Citigroup as another client, Citi Wealth, in fact, and they're targeting exclusively the super neos, that top 50%. And then there's 100% of neos in the middle. We did look at high value traditionals to see, who in the 10 million traditionals, can we take the top 10% of those and find the ones that are the most valuable. Interesting, almost none of them, they're all older. They skew older. This typology is not age-based, but they skew older. They over-index for older. And they over-index for living outside urban areas. So they're the landed gentry, the tree changers and the sea changers. So if we look at, are they the premium consumers? Just some factors that I've thrown together for you. Quality is more important than price. I buy luxuries. I consider myself a leader rather than a follower. Ready to try new and different products. Expensive restaurants are worth the money. Have wealth management, more than $1 million in investment and savings. That one's 100% difference between the population, and more than that. And a big spender, that's the crucial one. because I failed to point out when we were looking at the neos and traditionals that 91% of neos are in the big spender category and only 6% of traditionals are in the big spender category. The big spender category is the top third of elective spenders in the economy. And let's look at that. So they're not only big spenders, they're digital natives, they're highly educated, and it's got nothing to do with their age or income. So if we look at right across, we can see the big spenders. If you look at the neos and traditionals, you can see 90% is, in fact, it's just more recently gone up to 91% versus 6% for traditionals. University degree, 54% for neos and 18% for traditionals. And tech early adoption, 42% versus 6%. So there are really significant differences between them. But is it an age thing? Well, let's look at millennials, let's look at an age cohort. And the algorithm reveals that a similar mindset split exists. And that debunks the common belief that millennials, that there is some commonality among millennials, that millennials are a thing. Millennials are not a thing. Millennials are an age. It just happens to be an age group. And if we look at the population and all millennials, we can see that those, they're kind of close enough. But if we look on the right-hand side and we look at the almost 2 million traditional millennials, we can see only 5% big spenders compared to 91% of neo-millennials. And if we look at university degree, it's tech early adoption. Everyone thinks that millennials are tech early adopters that are really tech savvy. Only 5% of them are tech early adopters compared to neo-millennials. And the same is true. It's a very similar picture for baby boomers, for neo-boomers, and of course, every age group in between. So everyone wants the best price. Let's not be, I don't want to mislead you on this. Everyone wants the best price. But for traditionals, it always starts and ends with price. For neos, however, price is just the cost of falling in love.
Ross, can I just interrupt you there? There's a question from a student in the chat. I don't know if you've got access to chat there.
I can't see.
So it's a question from Renee, who's at Swinburne. She says, just curious, can this be applied worldwide, or is it primarily Western cultures or just Australia? So
it's a really good question, and hold that thought. It's about to be revealed.
Thank you.
So neos need to fall in love if you're going to unlock any value. That's unfair. The answer is yes. It does go across all. It's dominant in Western cultures, but in Eastern cultures as well. I'll show you the numbers in a minute. So to unlock value, neos need to fall in love. So neos take a mental shortcut to make decisions, and they base it, this is the heuristic thing, they base it on intuition and personal benchmarks rather than strict logic and rationality. They don't always conduct a mental cost-benefit analysis in making a choice, but rather take an emotional shortcut like falling in love. And when they fall in love with what you offer, they'll immediately find rational reasons to support their choice, a kind of post-rationalization. But remember, if they don't love what you offer, it's back to commoditized price logic and deals. So when someone's trying to work out are they a neo or traditional, you might be thinking, gee, I behave like a neo most of the time, but when it comes to telco or parking or buying a fare on a plane, I behave like a traditional. Well, if the brand hasn't got you to fall in love with them and given you something other than price, transaction, functions, features, then everyone behaves the same. So it's just important to understand that nuance. I'm going to show you a quick commercial that is a classic Neo commercial. It was made in England, and it's an Audi commercial, a car, and it won all kinds of marketing effectiveness awards. So let's hope this works. Give me a wave, David, if it is.
He's Isn't it rich? Are we prepared? Leave the last on the ground. You will mid-air. Send in the clowns. Where are the clowns? Send in the clowns. Just when I'd stopped opening doors, finally knowing all that I wanted was yours, making my entrance again with my usual flair. Show off my lines. No one is there. Quick, send in the clowns. Don't bother, they're here.
Now, what's significant about that commercial is that, you know, some wag said at some point, you know, if there are only fewer clowns on the road, we'd be a lot safer. And the agency just took it literally and decided to use clowns as the kind of value proposition, and any features and functions in that. So there was no price because it's a brand ad. It's not a retail ad. But there are no features or functions other than kind of as you're going on, as the narrative unfolds, you just see some things, but they're almost subliminal, and it's all based on emotion and you know, really falling in love with the brand. So it's a really wonderful example of doing that. Now, to answer the question that was asked earlier, Neos are everywhere. They're doing more of everything, and they're doing it more frequently than anyone else on the planet. So there are 4.7 million in Australia, 64 million in the US, and so on. There are 24 million in Indonesia and 146 million in China. Now, the difference is profound in terms of the percentage. 24% in all of the Western economies, and about 9% in the Asian, particularly in the Asian economies, but in absolute numbers, they're huge. So there are more Neos, for example, in Shanghai than there are in the whole of Australia. And they behave exactly, they have the same attitudes and behavior as an Australian Neo walking down a hip strip. So what about COVID? Well, in any economic shock, a resilient brand needs resilient customers. It was interesting, after the GFC, we tracked it all the way through the GFC, and they were pretty, so this is consumer confidence. And if we're not confident, we don't spend. So consumer confidence is crucial. They came out of the GFC, the Neos came out of the GFC first, and they came out fastest. And that makes it a very robust consumer type for a robust brand. So let's have a quick look at Suzuki, which is part of the challenge that you guys have got. So having a look at the brief, it's interesting that fun was the kind of core factor, or the core factor in the value proposition, or to inform the value proposition from the brief. And the number one Neo attitude to cars is, I will only buy a car that is fun to drive. And it really dominates. So this is an index. As you all know, I'm sure, 100 represents the population. So Neos are 34% more likely than the population to buy a car that's fun to drive. And if you add 34 to the difference between, on the traditionals, 21, you get 55%, I think, more likely than traditionals to buy a car that's fun to drive. Lots of sex appeal, seriously consider an electric car. So this is consideration. I'd like a car that handles like a racing car, and I want it to look sporty, but it doesn't need to go fast. All of those are significantly over-indexing, and all of those are significantly under-indexing for traditionals. There's that discriminant modelling I was talking about. I'm interested in how people are different, not how they're the same. And for Suzuki, when it comes to consideration, neo-millennials are the optimal target. So the neo-millennials, and if we look at the neo index, it's 152 for Suzuki, but neo-millennials is 186. So they're 86% more likely in the population to consider a Suzuki. And then if we look at the particular models, we can see the S-Cross is the top Neo model, and there's the 5 top Neo Suzuki models anyway. And once again, they're significantly over-indexing for almost all of them for Neo Millennials, except for the Baleno, which is just very, very close to Neos generally, and more than traditionals are. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'll keep moving, but any consumer classification must be operationalized. Now, I just can't stress this enough. I keep talking about this, and I'm sure, David, you and the other lecturers really talk a lot about this, but we have this idea that, and particularly in agencies, I've spent a lot of time in and around agencies, and really smart people in agencies sit around and hold hands and go, and come up with segmentation ideas that are really, really exciting. And, the brand picks them up globally. And then next thing I have to do is try and work out how to operationalize it, how to actually turn it into a usable thing and not just a really wonderful idea and piece of intellectual property. So, for example, in terms of creative execution, the clients we work with get what is known as the Neo Marketing Playbook, which tells them everything they need to know about creative execution in particular. And you can see on the right-hand side, I don't know if you can see that, but there are the factors in the mantra, Neo mantra, like individuality and relationship, and information is oxygen, and the edge is the place to be. Design is the new Zen, all about beauty. Change is evolution. Authenticity is emblematic. And think small. There is a mantra in the Neo thing that says, stop shouting, we can't hear you. And all through the COVID, we've seen the big banks taking out full page ads, shouting at us, telling us how big, safe and friendly they are, and we're here to help. And everyone is saying, we're here to help, which is an intelligent, completely self-referencing point of view. Why on earth they're not saying, what is it you need right now, which is all about the consumer? And stop shouting, stop taking full page ads and saying, why we're big, safe and friendly and why you should trust us. And it's crazy, particularly for this group of people. So how Neos think is how Neos behave. So what is it they want? They want to be the architects of their own life outcomes. They want to have a personal relationship with a business that's Neo-aligned. They want to be offered relevance, expertise, and rich information. So when you add relevance, expertise, and rich information, what do you get? I'll tell you what you get. You get knowledge. And knowledge is way more important than just information. They like to jettison mundane tasks. That means they're happy to have someone, if they're buying a house, to come up with the 3 options that they should buy, but they want to make the decision. So they like to be offered options, but be in control of the final decision. They like to be recognized, remembered, and treated as valued individuals. So they'll happily give all their details. They'll give you feedback. They'll give all kinds of things once, but don't ever ask them again. They like to connect their relentless curiosity with new discoveries and then tell everyone about them. They like to be challenged physically and intellectually, and to change constantly and evolve both themselves and their world, so that the world changes. They like to think small, yearning for whispered secrets, not shouted headlines. So this whispered secrets thing is, if we go back to the Audi for a minute, let's take another car brand. We've looked at two, let's take BMW. So there would be traditionals who'd buy a BMW and there'd be neos who bought a BMW, but they buy them for completely different reasons. So the traditional would buy a BMW for the badge, to say something to someone else about them, for the status, whereas a neo would buy a BMW as a whispered secret to themselves, not to say something to someone else about them, but just to say something to themselves. And there's a checklist for me communicating with neos. When I'm working with very large clients, I tell them all kinds of really, really clever, erudite, intellectual, scholarship things that I absolutely adore. And they just about go to sleep every time. And I put this list up and everyone goes, wow, that list is so great. That was the best thing in the presentation. It is just the cross I have to bear. And it goes something like, am I putting them in control? That is asking them what they need. Am I giving them options? That is letting them decide. Have I found points of relevance to them? So everyone talks about personalization. If you're not also talking about relevance, forget personalization. So if you're saying Dear Ross in an EDM, that's personalization. But unless in that EDM you're saying, now we know you really love blah, and you're really interested in this, 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 and this, so we've got news for you, then I'm not going to read it. There has to be strong relevance. That goes for ads. So that's why it's crucial that you need to know who you're in business for. Otherwise, how can you talk to traditionals and neos who are looking for completely different things, and completely different things are relevant to them? You simply can't do it. You just end up talking to everyone and it becomes pointless. Number 4, is it personalized or at least personal? And number 5 is, am I communicating like a friend? Simple language. So there's a mantra I have, and that is tell the truth simply. So in terms of media, so we're still talking about operationalizing and how important it is for operationalizing. So for example, Roy Morgan, about 94% of all advertising dollars in Australia go via the Roy Morgan planning system in agencies. And the neo, all of the neos traditionals, all of the neo profiles that we've been looking at are immediately available. They can just be switched on for the agency for any client at any time. That's what I'm talking about operationalizing. Also, digital agencies can buy it via LiveRamp, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So what's crucial about understanding the channels for these guys is that they're very heavy digital users. It is their dominant channel. So if we look at this, we can see from an index point of view that how the neo profiles way over index for heavy internet use compared to the traditionals. And once again, talking about activation, it has to be able to be activated and operationalized. It has to be able to be activated across direct, out of home, display, social, video, mobile, EDM, mail, all of those. And for example, in digital, we can push neos into a LiveRamp account. LiveRamp, I don't know who's familiar with LiveRamp, but LiveRamp is a digital kind of gateway, and it's free to join. And from there you can load neos into Facebook, Adobe Ad Cloud, Google, DV360, or you can just buy them straight on Facebook. and it's all there, you just have to press a button. So that's all part of the operationalization and why it's important. Which brings us to the point where I say, are there any questions?
Thank you, Ross. So that's absolutely marvellous presentation. Thank you very much for upsetting students' understandings of segmentation. I'd just like to introduce quickly John Gregg, who's joined us. Do you want to switch your camera on, John?
Yes, thanks, David. For some reason, my camera's not working.
Oh,
so
okay.
I can't get it to work for some reason, so sorry about that. But great presentation. Thanks, Ross. Really, really good. Lots of really interesting information in there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, David, before we go on, am I back now?
Yeah, you've reverted to screen of the students here. We've got a smaller group of students at the moment, and I can see the numbers there. But is there any questions for Ross? Here comes a question coming in. Can you see the chat, Ross, or do you want me to? Yeah. You can.
From Renee.
Yeah.
So yeah, what can you see it, Ross? Yeah.
Oh, NEO stands for New Economic Order. So it's an abbreviation of New Economic Order. It's Greek for new. So we hear a lot about neobanks. I'm not sure the origin of the neobank, but in one of the neo books I wrote, one of them was published in 2008. You know, 10 years later, we heard about neobanks, and I was talking about neobanks then, and I've been talking about neobanks ever since, and I've tried to find where that comes from, but I'll take credit for it. I'm the kind of person that when someone says, you know, isn't it a beautiful morning, I say, you're welcome. So neo comes from New Economic Order, so the new way of thinking. And these people are the future shapers. When I did a big project with JD Hi-Fi, and the marketing director there said, follow the neos and you'll find the future. So that's another aspect.
John, you have a question?
Yeah, Ross, I was just going to ask about, so the traditional values, the Roy Morgan traditional values, the 9, I think it was 10 segments.
Oh, they're value segments?
Yeah, the value segments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you still use those, or is it mainly now the neo and the traditionals? Has it been simplified down to that? Or?
No, Roy Morgan, who I work closely with but don't work for, Roy Morgan still uses the value segments, but not very much. Clients tend not to use them very much. The value segments are really good for understanding people's values, but they don't really ascribe any value. So they're not good for telling you who is going to be valuable. And really in the past, particularly in the past 5 years, when marketing has changed so dramatically in Australia, it's unrecognizable to what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. The change has been very much towards understanding where can we unlock value, where does the economic value lie? So it is completely different to that. It's built totally differently.
Yeah. Okay.
John, just on that, Roy Morgan probably moved on to the Helix personas a while ago, and I guess that's the more sort of recent tool in the segmentation area. But like Ross has outlined, they also provide a fairly a great planning tool, which is sort of embedded in a lot of media agencies.
Roy Morgan does. So the two major audience products, tools they have is Helix, which takes an entire population and makes sense of it. And the other one is their Roy Morgan Premium, which they've licensed, having done a search around the world, came back to this neo typology and have used it to underpin their premium consumer offering. And it has a completely different role to Helix in that Helix doesn't have any kind of proposition. It just tells you how the population works, kind of geodemographically with some psychographics thrown in. But this actually is about value. So it's a completely different kind of coming at it with another direction.
We just on that, we have a little bit of a relationship with Roy Morgan. We use
Right.
some of their data for training in our media planning unit. So, but
Fantastic.
we use the Helix personas in that unit, and in the first year, we actually do still use the value
Various
segments,
segments, yeah.
just to basically demonstrate what segmentation is.
We should unlock the premium segments for you. So
That sounds like a great idea.
you
I
and
will
I
contact them.
You and I can follow that up.
Or you could, yeah, that would be great. Premium. We have a question coming in as well from Jasmine, and then one from Monica.
Jasmine's asked, are there any circumstances where you've not used NEOs? Yes, there are. Look, in the book we wrote in America, for America, really snappily called, what is it, 109 million markets of one, how the new economic order is changing America. I don't know, so I get bored after about the 15th word. We talked about it in terms of it's like there are two planets. There's planet Neo and there's planet traditional. And you can make profit, you can make money on either. So you can, there are lots of businesses that are really successful, that are in business for traditionals and very, very successful. The point is that you really need to know which planet you're on, because there's very little oxygen between the two. And if you're on planet Neo, we've talked about that. But if you're on planet traditional, you can make very, very good money with having, a low cost business model, a high volume business model, and low margin business model. They're the kind of elements, and you can be very successful. But you better not have the second best price on planet traditional, because you'll, the one with the best price will kill you. So there are lots of circumstances that you wouldn't necessarily use it, but don't think of it as a luxury only. We've been probably most successful with an energy company, for example. We had a phenomenal result with an energy company, through to Qantas, for example, which is at the other end. So it really can apply, even in Telstra or who I've worked with, or energy companies. It's a matter of having a differential marketing strategy. One marketing strategy for Neos and one marketing strategy for the traditionals. In America, it's big enough that a brand can just be a Neo brand. In Australia, big companies can't afford to do that. So they tend to have, two different strategies. Monica's asking, why can't traditionals ever become Neos or vice versa? Well, it'll take another session for me to explain the genes that determine which one you're going to be, and whether those genes express and what makes them express. But you really are just, you really are just one or the other. So I'm sorry about that. And
that is fascinating.
Very interesting. Thank you. And thank
It's
you.
brutal. It's a brutal model.
But Ross, what about the nouveau rich? People who have made lots and lots of money, say, for example, out of maybe Sydney real estate prices, for example.
Yeah.
How does that come into the equation, or doesn't
Well, it kind of doesn't, because we don't know whether they're a Neo or a traditional.
Right.
And there are plenty of Neo entrepreneurs. They tend to be willing to take risks. They have what we call in psychology terms a high internal locus of control, which means success for them is a matter of planning, not a matter of luck. Whereas traditionals tend to have a low internal locus of control. So Kerry Packer, for example, was Australia's richest traditional. He loved gambling. Low locus of control, believed success was a matter of luck, not a matter of planning.
Okay.
So they're quite different. So John, it just depends. You can't really determine on success or how much they make or anything else which one they are.
Yeah.
I can tell. You can't tell by looking at them. I've run over 100 focus groups, or been, managed over 100 focus groups, and see groups of neos come in and my heart would sink. I'd have the client sitting next to me and I'd think, I am so screwed. All these people, like, street people, until they started talking, and all of a sudden all this, beauty comes out of the mouth, and the desire and the kind of aspirations for the things that they love, and it just transforms. So it's very difficult. We have narrowed it down to a bunch of filter questions that I can, probably ask someone about 5 questions in conversation and work it out pretty quickly, but it's not easy.
Okay. Right,
Ross, I've got just a thought. I'm sort of just thinking about your presentation, your talk, and I got, when you were talking earlier about the slow lane and the fast lane. I thought that was really interesting. And you talked about the importance of narrowing a customer, or I call it consumer. I know you call it customer, but for some reason.
No, there's a difference. Consumers are people in the population who consume, and customers are directly related to a brand. A brand has customers.
Prospects, right, yeah. Okay.
And so I talk about them both, but I really talk about neos as consumers, not then they become customers when you attract them.
Right, yep. So I thought that was really interesting. So you talked about the importance of narrowing customer segments, and how, I guess in a sense, they're talking about the importance of targeting that narrow.
Yeah.
And then you sort of gave us a subtle hint, I think, or certainly gave students a little bit of a subtle hint, certainly in terms of neo-classification. And that was the idea of neo-millennials really being the opportunity. That's sort of one of the big takeaways that I read into it.
It's a crucial takeaway, because we hear so the CEO that I mentioned earlier, the imaginary CEO saying that we're in business for everyone, is as appalling as someone saying we're in business for millennials, or our core market is this age group, or we're going after millennials. Well, which ones?
Yeah.
Because as you could see from those charts, those tables, they're split. 2 million of them look nothing like what we imagine millennials look like. Whereas, another 1.6 million of the neo-millennials are kind of exactly what we imagine millennials to be. And that's a really startling revelation, I think, when you think about it, that we just keep talking about millennials as if there is some homogeneity.
Yes, they're all in one big pot.
Sorry, John, go for it.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking. Yeah, so we just class them as one group, which they're not. Yeah.
No, they're absolutely not. They're they're fundamentally 2 groups, and it's more nuanced than that. But let's just say they're fundamentally 2 groups, and unless you understand that, you're wasting half the marketing spend on people who don't care about the kind of neo-millennial value proposition that you're promoting.
Which brings me to my next question, but I'm just conscious of time. I'm just wondering if any students have any further questions, because we're nearly at the hour. But I just want to throw you this question, Ross, and you probably already have the answer in your brain. But so what the students have this semester, and I know you've seen it, is we have a brand brief.
Yeah.
And we have a brand brief for Suzuki Automobile. So Suzuki Automobile historically is not a premium product in the automobile hierarchy. It's not the BMWs of this world, if you know what I mean. So if we think about that idea of a brand brief, when we look at potentially targeting the neo-millennials via mass communication, because we're talking a brand, well, it's sort of above and below the line, I guess. It depends what the students want to do. But they've got a reasonably good size creative budget, and they've got a multi-million-dollar media budget. Where are we with that? Should we do it? Is it really about mass communication when we're really going to be communicating to people who aren't going to be buying anything?
Yeah, no, it's not. It shouldn't be about mass communication. And $2 million media buy can't really buy too much mass communication these days anyway. But I think that one thing that I can tell you is that SPOD, streaming video on demand, and when we're looking at YouTube, there are, cinema when cinemas are open. These are kind of really classic neo channels that are, if it were me, I'd be looking at spending the money on the TVC. I'd probably pull some money out of the media budget and put it more into the television commercial, and run it for a week, leave a week, run it for another week, and then pull it off TV and run it totally online. Just give it a bit of mass to kind of give it some awareness, but then get all your frequency, all your reach in particular online with it, and have a lot of below the line activity going, but very digital. So it really, really should be a kind of a predominantly a digital campaign for these guys.
Yeah,
but that's a great hint, and I think we're probably going to need to close the hour or close the virtual cafe almost on that presentation, John. And I think Nicholas is back. Would you like to ask or say anything, guys?
Could I just ask one more question quickly? Sorry, Ross.
There's always one.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the cinema and the SVOD. What about outdoor?
Yeah, look, outdoor is only useful for neos if it's kind of cheeky and pointing to something else.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not that useful for brand building, but it's really useful to point them to something that they can see online to kind of make a connection for them. It's hard to have a call to action on a out of home, but a lot of the digital out of home these days you can, and so I think out of home really has a place, but it's not right for the kind of building the core message. It's right for creating a kind of a disruptor idea. And Koala, one of our clients, Koala, the bed making company, furniture company, does this pretty well. They used radio, for example, to kind of promote their digital. They used TV to do the same. They used outdoor to do the same. And I think that's a really good trick.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
great. Thank you very much, Ross. Look, on the final call, students, for any questions. We're going to take one more question via chat. I'll give you 30 seconds. Always a lecturer.
It's always I do apologise for my camera not working as well. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, John. You're probably in your pajamas.
How did you guess?
Hey, look, I think we'll call it the end then of this virtual cafe. Look, I'd like to thank you, Ross, very much for joining us this week, week 3 of our virtual cafe. This is being recorded and made available on our website so students can log in and access the recording. And certainly under COVID-19, because of the pandemic, that is probably the way that most of them are going to be reviewing the content. But look, a brilliant presentation and really interesting. And thank you for sharing your neo modeling or model and concept. Really, really interesting. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for making it so much fun.